Rising thick off Canyon Creek that August 2013 morning, the mist clung to the Douglas firs like wet cotton in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Summer came late and departed early. The atmosphere smelled of pine resin and damp earth. Chipmunks chattered in the underbrush. Once, from somewhere high in the canopy, a raven called. It was the type of morning hikers dream about: cool, quiet, unedited. Maury Kelly, 19 years old, exited her tent at Canyon Creek Campground just after sunrise. Maury Kelly vanished by noon. Her faded gray hoodie, black leggings, and trail runners with neon yellow laces. Her black hair was knotted into a relaxed ponytail. She carried her phone in one hand and a water bottle in the other, but there was no signal this far back into the forest. Campers in adjacent locations recalled seeing her stretch next to the picnic table, yawns and gazing toward the trailhead leading east into the gorge. She didn't speak to anybody. She did not wave. She just began walking. Her purse and keys were tucked into the front pocket. Tent was still closed. She had paid in cash. When her mother, Linda Kelly, contacted the ranger station on August 18th to see if anyone had spotted her daughter, the alarm started. The ranger station log indicated she had checked in alone 2 nights earlier. Her automobile, a silver Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a Whitman College sticker on the back window, remained parked at the campground entrance. Maury promised to call home by Saturday evening. She never broke her pledges. When the phone didn't ring, Linda sensed something was wrong. Within hours, search and rescue teams were dispatched. Volunteers from Close Trout Lake and White Salmon arrived by Sunday morning. Tracking dogs found Maury's scent near the trailhead, tracked it east for about a mile, then lost it entirely at a rocky creek crossing with fast and shallow water. Helicopters circled above. Searchers examined ridgelines, explored caverns, brushed canyon walls. They discovered no evidence. There was no apparel, no equipment, no evidence of struggle. The weather had been clear throughout the week. No storms, no flash floods, no cause for someone to merely disappear. Still, Maury Kelly was gone. Her acquaintances described her as meticulous, disciplined, someone who arranged everything down to the smallest detail. She was a sophomore at Whitman College in Walla Walla studying environmental science. She loved the outdoors but was not wild. She had walked alone previously, always reported. People where she was going always carried a map. Her social media contained images of wild blooms, dawn views, handwritten diary entries about discovering peace in the forests. The last post, dated August 16th, said, "2 days alone in the forest. No phone, no noise, just me and the trail. Cannot wait." But something had gone very wrong. Initially, the investigation moved swiftly by detectives from the Skamania County Sheriff's Office interviewing every camper who had been at Canyon Creek that weekend. Sitting alone by the fire pit, writing in a notebook, a solo hiker stated he had walked by her on Saturday morning, given a short hello, and observed she appeared distracted, gazing toward the ridgeline. Another camper, an older man with a dog, reported hearing footsteps near his tent at dawn on Sunday, but he had not checked outside. None of it added up to anything concrete, just bits, feelings, shadows. Frustration set in on the 3rd day of looking. Unmapped creek beds, dense undergrowth, and more than 1 million acres of steep ground characterized the forest. Maury could have gotten lost, fallen into a ravine, or gotten disoriented. The dogs, nevertheless, ought to have discovered something. A dropped water bottle, a piece of clothing. There was merely silence in place of anything else. On August 22nd, 1 week after she vanished, the formal search was reduced. Volunteer efforts went on unabated. For 10 days, sporadically, hope was fading. Maury's mother refused to move from the area. She walked the routes alone every day, yelling her daughter's name until her voice became horseless, and rented a cabin in Trout Lake. About 3 miles northeast of Canyon Creek Campground, a hiker found a gray hoodie caught on a branch in early September. It was moss-covered, faded, wet. Linda Kelly knew it immediately. It was Maura. She had worn that hoodie since high school and refused to throw it away despite it was breaking apart. The revelation restarted the search. Teams returned to the region and searched every inch of forest around Bear Creek. They uncovered nothing else. No shoes, no phone, no body. Just the hooded shirt hanging like a ghost in the trees. Theories abound. Some speculated Maury had lost her clothes because she was too hot and continued further into the forest. Others thought an animal attack had happened, despite no reports of ferocious bears or cougars in the area that summer. Some muttered darker options. Though the camping area was distant, it wasn't lonely. Strangers strolled by. Hunters, drifters, those fleeing the cities for a few days. What if someone had been monitoring her? What if she had not gone into the woodland by herself? Detectives chased every lead. They checked her dormitory room, checked her phone records, and spoke to classmates and teachers. Maury had no adversaries, no strained connections, no history of depression or suicidal tendencies. Every account said she was a young woman very enthusiastic about her future. Her professors dubbed her bright, driven, and kind. Her friends said she was the one who remembered birthdays and sent handwritten notes. She wasn't someone who disappeared without a trace, but the forest had swallowed her entirely. By October, the case had gone cold. Maury Kelly was formally designated as missing and endangered. Her picture appeared on flyers posted in gas stations, grocery stores, and trailheads around Washington. Her mother created a Facebook page, Find Maury Kelly, which fast attracted thousands of followers. Vigils were held in Walla Walla and Trout Lake. Students at Whitman College tied yellow ribbons around the trees on campus. Winter arrived early to the Gifford Pin Show that year, blanketing the forest in snow by mid-November.
Looking for Maury, though Kelly didn't halt, it dropped to a crawl. Volunteers found difficult navigation on the icy road. During storms, helicopters were grounded. Linda Kelly stayed in the cabin close to Trout Lake, lighting one candle in the window every night. The forest turned into a white stronghold, silent and impenetrable. Local neighbors started dropping food on her front door and firewood arranged by the entrance. No one knew what to say to a mother whose daughter had been erased from the world. Maury's father, Robert Kelly, a retired high school teacher from Spokane, drove out every weekend to join the search. He was a quiet man, methodical, the kind of person who believed problems could be solved through persistence and logic. He printed hundreds of maps marking every trail, every creek, every potential route Maury might have taken. He interviewed rangers, studied weather patterns from August, read incident reports from other missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest. He created spreadsheets recording sightings, witness testimonies, and search grid coordinates. But the data led nowhere. It was like trying to solve an equation with half the numbers missing. In December, a winter storm knocked out electricity for 3 days throughout Skamania County. When the roads cleared, Robert drove to Canyon Creek Campground alone. 2 feet of snow covered the place. It was deserted, tracked before losing her scent. The creek was frozen now, silent beneath a sheet of ice. He stood there for over an hour, staring at the spot where his daughter had disappeared, trying to understand what the forest wasn't telling him. A ranger found him after dark, sitting in his truck with the engine running, hands frozen to the steering wheel. The ranger drove him back to Trout Lake and called Linda. That night, Robert finally broke. He sobbed in his wife's arms and said the words neither of them had been able to say out loud. She won't return. But Linda wouldn't tolerate it. She called private detectives, psychics, cadaver dog specialists. Reaching out to amateur investigators across the nation, she contributed to true crime message boards. One person, known as Trail Hunter 88, alleged to have cleared 3 cold cases with topographical study and satellite photography. They extended aid. Linda provided them every image, every map, every piece of information she had. Weeks passed. Eventually, Trail Hunter 88 stopped answering. Another dead end. In March of 2014, Maury's Whitman College friends arranged a memorial hike. 30 students went to the Gifford Pinchot carrying photographs of Maury and bouquets of wildflowers 6 months after she disappeared. They walked the Canyon Creek Trail together, singing songs she had loved, reciting poems she had written in her journals. At the place her hoodie was discovered, they constructed a tiny cairn out of river stones and topped it with a laminated photograph of Maury smiling in front of a waterfall. It was a lovely gesture, but it felt like surrender, like they were saying goodbye. Detective Sarah Ortega from the Skamania County Sheriff's Office kept the case file open on her desk. She'd been assigned to Maury's disappearance from the beginning and refused to let it fade into bureaucracy. Ortega was in her early 40s, a former park ranger who'd joined law enforcement after seeing too many missing persons cases go unsolved in wilderness areas. She knew the Gifford better than most, Pinchot. She knew how simple it was to disappear out there if you didn't know what you were doing. She had camped in almost every campground and trekked every important trail. Maury knew, though. Ortega was most concerned about that. She reviewed the witness statements once again. The pair from Portland who had seen Maury by the fire pit recalled she had been penning in a notebook. That notebook has still not been discovered. Ortega asked for a second search of Maury's car, her dorm room, her tent. Nothing. Maury had checked into the campground on Friday afternoon, set up her tent, and ate dinner alone. She reviewed the timeline once. She had been seen on the path Saturday. She strolled toward the trailhead Sunday morning and vanished. Ortega pulled security footage from a gas station in Trout Lake where Maury had stopped on her way to the campground. The grainy video showed her filling up her tank, going inside to pay, buying a granola bar and a bottle of water. She was alone. She looked relaxed, maybe happy also. There was no sign of pain, there was no indication she was seeing someone. Ortega searched more into Maury's history. No criminal record, no financial problems, no suspicious online behavior. Her phone record revealed frequent communication with friends and family. Nothing special. Normal transactions, textbooks, coffee shops, and gas were on her bank account. Maury Kelly became a name in a file cabinet. By the spring of 2014, the investigation had ground to a halt. Ortega requested more resources, but the county was stretched thin. Other cases, other missing persons, other families waiting for answers. Ortega interviewed Maury's teachers once more, her roommate, her lab partners. Everyone said the same thing. Maury was thriving. She was enthusiastic about her research, talking about graduate school, making plans for the future. She was not someone who would walk away from her life. On a fading poster, a face, a recollection that grew less distinct every month. Linda Kelly stopped posting daily updates on the Facebook page. Robert Kelly returned to Spokane, unable to continue taking time off work. The cabin in Trout Lake was given up. The candle in the window went dark. But the forest remembered. Hikers continued to report unusual sensations near Bear Creek, the site Maury's hoodie had been discovered. Some claimed to hear footsteps behind them on the trail, only to turn and see nothing. Others spoke of a vague form moving among the trees at dawn, always vanishing as they approached. The stories circulated among the trekking group, shared around bonfires, and published on route forums. Some wrote it off as loss taking shape, the collective grief of a people that had lost one of its own. Others weren't so sure. In June of 2014, 10 months after Maury vanished, a geology group from the University of Washington was researching near the South Fork of Canyon Creek, mapping fault lines and mineral deposits were the source of their work in a secluded part of the forest rarely visited by leisure hikers. One student, descending a steep embankment to gather rock samples, observed something lodged between two boulders. Purple phone case with a damaged screen protector. She grabbed it free and saw the initials scratched on the back. MK. The sheriff's office was contacted right away by the pupils. Detective Ortega showed up within 2 hours.
She held the phone case in her gloved hand, turning it over slowly. It was Maury's. Although there was no question, the phone was not there, only the case left like a breadcrumb. Ortega instructed another search of the region. They found nothing further. The finding reawakened queries that had never quite vanished. How the phone case had come almost 4 miles from the campground at a spot I had no reason to visit. Had she been there voluntarily, or had somebody carried her? Where was she now? Had she been alive long enough to lose her phone case? Officially, the case was reopened. New volunteers were hired. Ortega formed a new group, including a forensic botanist expert in decomposition timelines and plant growth patterns. They went back to Bear Creek at the geology site to every spot linked to Maury. They evaluated soil samples, searched for DNA, and used ground-penetrating radar in places where the terrain permitted. Weeks went by. The forest gave them nothing. Linda Kelly permitted herself a flicker of optimism upon hearing about the phone case. Perhaps it meant Maury traveled farther than anyone thought. Perhaps she was still out there, waiting to be found. But as the summer dragged on and the searches yielded no results, that hope began to collapse under its own weight. By August of 2014, exactly 1 year after Maury had disappeared, the searches stopped again. The case went cold for the second time, and the forest, dense and ancient and indifferent, held on to its secrets a little longer. Years passed like water over stone, steady and eroding. By 2016, Maury Kelly's name had transformed into a ghost narrative told among hikers in the Gifford Pinchot, campfire stories about the girl who entered the mist and never returned. Some swore they had seen her near Canyon Creek at dawn, a gray silhouette moving among the trees. Others claimed to have heard her voice crying from deep in the forest, soft and begging. Though privately, park rangers brushed off the stories as folklore, the kind of mythology growing around death. Once night fell, although she never really left the Gifford Pinchot, Linda Kelly had returned to Spokane. She preserved Maury's room exactly as it had been, a half-finished painting of Mount Adams leaning against the wall, hiking boots by the door, textbooks stacked on the table. Once in May on her daughter's birthday, and twice a year in August on the anniversary of Maury's vanishing, she would visit the forest. She would travel to Canyon Creek Campground, hike the paths alone, and leave fresh flowers at the cairn near Bear Creek. Over time, the laminated image faded. Maury's smile was scarcely visible now, but Linda replaced it every visit. She never stopped believing her daughter deserved to be remembered. Robert Kelly had withdrawn into himself. He retired early from teaching, stopped answering calls from friends, spent most days in his garage, surrounded by maps and case files he'd accumulated over the years. He developed an obsession with other missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest, convinced there was a pattern no one else could see. He tracked vanishings in national forests across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, marking each one with a colored pin on a massive wall map. Clusters formed, patterns emerged, or maybe they didn't. Perhaps it was simply a grieving father seeking meaning in random. Sergeant, by 2017, Detective Sarah Ortega kept Maury's case file in her office. She would pull it out every few months, study the evidence, read through witness statements once again, looking for something she might have missed. For years, she had bothered about the discovery of the phone case. How had it covered 4 miles from the campground to a faraway geological location? She had consulted with search and rescue professionals, wildlife biologists, even a hydrologist who focused on creek flow patterns. None of them could clarify. The only sensible conclusion was that someone had transported it there. But why and who? In the autumn of 2017, a fresh lead developed from a surprising source. A man named Vincent Harrow, imprisoned in the Washington State Penitentiary for armed robbery, contacted police claiming he knew something about Maury Kelly. Harrow had lived off the grid, camped illegally, and dodged police in the Gifford Pinchot neighborhood over the summer of 2013. He claimed to police he had seen a young lady near Canyon Creek that August who matched Maury's description, but she had not been alone. He stated there was someone with her, a man, middle-aged, tall, with a khaki jacket and baseball hat. Harrow could not see his face, but he recalled how the man stood near to the woman, nearly possessive. High at the moment, paranoid, Harrow had been hiding in the brush. He hadn't given it much thought till he saw Maury's picture years later in a prison library. Ortega drove to the penitentiary the next day. She sat across from Harrow in a gray interrogation room, scrutinizing his face for indicators of deception. He was gaunt, restless, with the sunken eyes of someone. Harrow said he'd seen them for possibly 2 minutes before they vanished deeper into the woods. He remembered the woman sported a gray hoodie and dark hair in a ponytail. He recalled the man wore a green backpack and constantly peered over his shoulder as though he didn't wish to be noticed. Harrow's narrative, though, was distinct. He described the place he had seen them, a bend in the path close to a fallen cedar tree about half a mile from the camping area. Never saw them again. Ortega brought in a sketching artist. Harrow spent hours trying to recreate the face of the guy from memory. The result was frustratingly hazy. Average height, average build, white male, possibly in his 40s or 50s. Could have been anyone. Ortega ran the description through databases and cross-referenced it with known offenders in the area. She also checked for any similar reports from 2013. Nothing matched. She returned to Canyon Creek, took the route Harrow described, discovered the fallen cedar tree, moss thick along its trunk. It was still there, rotting into the earth. Standing in that area, she tried to imagine what Harrow had seen, a young woman and an older man walking together. Had Maury known him? Was she in danger? Or had Harrow's drug-adult memory created a tale that didn't exist? The lead went nowhere. Harrow's account was merely another unverifiable narrative without clear identification, without any supporting proof.
Ortega submitted the report and continued on, but the image remained with her. Too close standing, a man in a khaki jacket gazing over his shoulder. Guilty behavior or merely caution? She wasn't absolutely confident. Maury's case had been cold for 5 years by 2018. Linda kept a Facebook page that had slowed to infrequent birthday greetings, anniversary reminders. Well-intentioned strangers in the comments area provided prayers and ideas. Armchair investigators believed that if only someone would solve the enigma. Ortega pored through them. Occasionally, she would read them late at night when she couldn't sleep. Most were nonsense, outrageous assumptions about underground trafficking networks or cult activity in the woods. Every now and then, though, someone would post a detail that made her stop. A hiker who had witnessed anything odd near Bear Creek. A camper who discovered an antique notebook buried under leaves. A ranger recalled a guy inquiring about a missing girl in 2014, then vanished before anybody could get his name. The issue with witnesses forgot details or manufactured new ones. Evidence deteriorated. Trails vanished, literally and figuratively. Ortega understood the numbers. If a missing person wasn't found within the first 72 hours, the likelihood of finding them alive sank to almost nil. Most cases stayed unclosed indefinitely if they weren't discovered within a year. Kelly was getting 6 years missing. The forest reclaimed what it had taken. But in the spring of 2019, something changed. Marcus Lowe, a young detective, joined the Skamania County Sheriff's Office. He had just finished a specialized training course in cold case resolution and forensic genealogy. He asked Ortega if he could examine Maury's case after hearing about it during his orientation. She handed it over promptly, grateful someone else cared enough to read. Lowe spent weeks engrossed in the evidence. He digitized everything, constructed a timeline, and created a geographical profile of Maury's movements. He noticed something that Ortega missed. The phone case was found close to a fault line, an area that can easily have small landslides and shifting soil. What if someone didn't bring it there? What if changes in the earth or water moved it over time? Lowe looked into how erosion happens, talked with geologists, and checked rainfall data from 2013 to 2014. His point of view made some sense. A strong winter storm might have shifted the case from where it was first found and carried it downstream through underground water paths. If this is true, it means Maury's body could be buried near where they first searched,
covered by dirt and forest waste. Ortega was doubtful, but open to trying anything. In June 2019, they set up a new search focusing on places where there was a lot of erosion or landslides recently. They used ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs trained to find bodies buried deep, and a group of forensic archaeologists. The search went on for 2 weeks. They searched many miles, checked creek beds, and dug up areas that looked suspicious. They discovered animal bones, old camping stuff, and signs of illegal fire pits, but there was no trace of Maury. On the last day, one of the cadaver dogs showed interest near a collapsed area by the South Fork of Canyon Creek. The team carefully dug in that spot, removing layers of dirt and rocks. 6 feet down, they found gray, faded fabric that was decomposed. It was buried next to small bone fragments that could have been human. The forensic team gathered everything and sent it to the state crime lab in Olympia for testing. That evening, Ortega called Linda Kelly. She chose her words with care. "We might have found something. We are waiting for confirmation, so please don't get your hopes up just yet." But Linda had been hoping for 6 years to receive this call. Hope was all she had left. The pieces found on the hillside were tiny, badly decayed, and mixed with dirt and other natural materials. Dr. Vasquez carefully placed them on a clean examination table under bright lights to start the slow process of studying them. The first thing he looked at was the fabric. It was a gray cotton blend that seemed like it came from a hoodie. However, it was so worn out that it was nearly impossible to tell if it matched the hoodie discovered in 2013. There were no tags or special marks, just some threads that hinted at what it used to be. The bone pieces were more hopeful. Dr. Vasquez recognized parts of a radius, a femur, and a few smaller bones that might have belonged to a hand or foot. All human and all from one person. The size and weight of the bones suggested that it was probably a young adult female. Dental records could help confirm this, but they needed more complete remains. What they had were just fragments of someone, not a full identity yet. The next step was to extract DNA. Dr. Vasquez sent samples to the lab's molecular biology section where the technicians worked to find the genetic material from the bone marrow. The bones were in bad shape. They had been wet, exposed to temperature changes, and affected by bacteria. But fortunately, forensic science has improved a lot lately. Using a method called whole genome amplification, the lab managed to get a partial DNA profile. It wasn't complete, but it was sufficient to check against existing databases for matches. Linda Kelly had given a DNA sample years before, which was kept in the National Missing Persons Registry. The comparison took 3 days. On July 2, 2019, Dr. Vasquez called Detective Ortega with the findings. The DNA matched. The remains were identified as belonging to Maury Kelly. Ortega closed her office door, sank into her chair, and took a moment of silence. After 6 long years, they had finally found her. Not alive, and not the miracle that Linda had hoped, but she was found. This discovery brought a complicated feeling of both relief and sadness. Relief that the search was finally over, sadness that it ended like this. That afternoon, Ortega reached out to Linda Kelly. She drove to Spokane on her own because she couldn't stand telling the bad news over the phone. When Linda opened the door, she was already crying, almost as if she had known the moment she spotted Ortega's car coming down the driveway. They took a seat together in the living room, surrounded by pictures of Miley's art. Ortega said the words that every detective fears. "We found her. I'm so sorry." Next, they called Robert Kelly. He drove from his home to Linda's without saying a word, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When he got there, Linda was on the porch, staring blankly into space. They didn't talk. They didn't have to. They just sat there together as the sun went down. 2 people who had been caught between hope and sadness for 6 years were finally facing the truth of their loss. The next morning, Ortega went back to Canyon Creek with a whole forensic team. Now that they knew where Miley had been found, they widened their search area. They carefully went through every bit of dirt around the spot where they found her, looking for any more remains,
personal items, or anything that might explain what happened. Over the week, they found more pieces of bone, enough to confirm that most of Miley's skeleton was still at that site. They also discovered bits of her clothing, a piece of a shoe, and even something unusual buried deeper than the bones. It was a small waterproof pouch like the ones hikers use to keep their valuables safe from water. Inside the pouch was a notebook. It was Miley's notebook, the one that people had seen her writing in the night before she went missing. The pages were wet, but still okay thanks to the waterproof seal. Detective Lowe took great care as he opened it, flipping through each page with gloved hands. The dates on the entries started from early summer 2013. Most of them were just simple notes about nature, drawings of plants and animals, and thoughts about being alone and quiet. But the last entries, written while she was at Canyon Creek Campground, shared a different experience. They said, August 16, 2013. I got to the campground around 3 o'clock. I set up my tent. Everything seems great here. It's quiet and peaceful. I saw a man watching me from across the campground earlier, but he walked away before I could say hi. He's probably just another camper. August 17th. I woke up early and hiked a main trail. Ran into the same man from yesterday. He wasn't hiking, he was just standing off the path. He smiled when I passed but didn't say anything. There was something off about it. I kept walking, came back to camp, and he was sitting at the picnic table next to my site. He said his name was David, stated that he camps here each summer, asked if I was by myself. I lied to him that I was going to meet some friends tomorrow. I don't know why I lied. He made me uncomfortable. The entry for August, my disappearance on the 18th, took longer and was more frantic. The handwriting grew less controlled as the entry progressed. August 18th. He's still here. David. I saw him again this morning standing near the trailhead. I decided to hike anyway. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. He followed me, not close, but I could see him behind me every time I looked back. I walked faster. He stayed the same distance away, like he was pacing me. I turned off the main trail, tried to lose him in the trees. I thought it worked. I stopped hearing footsteps, but then I saw him again ahead of me, this time just standing there like he'd been waiting. I asked him what he wanted. He said he just wanted to talk. He said the forest was dangerous for a girl alone. He said he could keep me safe. I told him to leave me alone. I tried to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm, not hard but firm. I pulled away and ran. I don't know where I am now. I'm off trail. I can hear the creek, but I can't see it. I intend to wait here until it gets dark, then try to make it back to camp. I ought to have followed my instincts. I should have left yesterday. If anyone finds this, his name is David. Khaki jacket, blue baseball cap. Drives a white truck, older model. It was parked close to the ranger station I saw. Please locate me. That was the last entry. The notebook had been sealed in the pouch, buried with her body or hidden nearby before she died. Either Miley tried to leave evidence behind, or the earth had simply swallowed it along with everything else. But now they had a name, David, a description, a vehicle. Detective Ortega felt the case crack open in her hands. This was no longer a mystery about a girl who wandered off and got lost. This was a predator. This was a crime. The investigation shifted immediately. Ortega and Lowe pulled records from the Canyon Creek Campground for August 2013, looking for anyone named David who had checked in that weekend. The ranger station kept logs, but they were incomplete. Many campers paid cash and never signed in properly. They expanded the search, looking for white trucks registered to men named David in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Thousands of names came back. They cross-referenced with criminal records, focusing on anyone with a history of violence, stalking, or assault. The list narrowed to 47 individuals. One name stood out. David Gene Kelmer, 52 years old, registered address in Stevenson, Washington, less than 20 miles from Canyon Creek Campground. Kelmer had a record. In 1998, he'd been charged with assault after a confrontation with a female hiker near Dog Mountain. The charges were dropped when the victim moved out of state and declined to testify. In 2005, he'd been investigated for harassment after multiple women reported being followed on trails near the Columbia River Gorge. No charges filed. In 2011, a restraining order had been issued by a woman in Hood River, Oregon, claiming Kelmer had showed up at her home uninvited after meeting her on a hiking trail. The order expired after 2 years. Kelmer was known to local rangers as someone who spent excessive time in national forests, often camping alone for weeks. He worked sporadically as a handyman, had no permanent address, lived out of his truck most of the year, a white 1987 Ford F-150. Ortega compared Kelmer's picture to the 2017 sketch that Vincent Harrow had helped with. By running it through a database of facial recognition software, the resemblance was strong, not perfect, but close enough. She contacted the Washington State Patrol and requested a welfare check on Kelmer's last known location. Officers found him 3 days later, camped illegally near Panther Creek, less than 15 miles from where Miley's remains had been discovered. When approached, Kelmer was calm, almost friendly. He said he'd been expecting someone to come eventually. He did not fight. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just smiled and said, "Took you long enough." Kelmer was taken into custody on July 12, 2019, and transported to Skamania County Jail. Ortega conducted the first interview the following morning. Kelmer sat across from her in the interrogation room, hands folded on the table, expression unreadable. He was tall, thin, weathered by years outdoors.
His eyes were pale blue, calm, almost serene. Ortega placed Maury's photo on the table between them and asked if he recognized her. Kelmer looked at the photo for a long time, then nodded slowly. He claimed that he remembered her and that she had visited Canyon Creek in August. Said they'd talked a few times, said she'd been friendly at first, then cold, then rude. He claimed he'd only been trying to help her, warned her about the dangers of hiking alone. He said she'd overreacted, accused him of following her when he'd just been walking the same trails. He denied ever touching her, denied ever threatening her. But when Ortega mentioned the notebook, Kelmer's expression changed. Just for a moment, a flicker of something. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that his story was falling apart. Ortega read aloud from Maury's final entry, the description of the white truck, the blue baseball cap, and the khaki jacket. Kelmer's hands were slightly clenched, but his face remained neutral. Ortega asked him directly, "Was Maury Kelly your victim?" Kelmer leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then, quietly, almost as if talking to himself, he said, "She shouldn't have run. I told her the forest was dangerous. I told her I could keep her safe, but she ran anyway." It wasn't a confession, not legally, but it was adequate. Ortega terminated the interview and contacted the prosecutor's office. The formal charges against David Gene Kelmer included kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and second-degree murder. He was denied bail. The trial was set for early 2020, and for the first time in 6 years, Linda and Robert Kelly allowed themselves to believe that justice might finally come for their daughter. The hiking community in the Pacific Northwest was shaken when David Gene Kelmer was taken into custody. Within hours of the news breaking, online forums exploded with stories from women who'd claimed they'd encountered him on trails over the years. In 2009, a Portland woman remembered a man in a khaki jacket who had followed her for 2 miles near Eagle Creek, always staying just far enough behind her to prevent her from confronting him. Another hiker from Bellingham described being approached by someone matching Kelmer's description at a remote campsite in 2015, offering unsolicited advice about bears and asking intrusive questions about whether she was going it alone. A jogger in the Columbia River Gorge recalled a white pickup truck that had slowly followed her along a Forest Service road in 2012. The driver watching her through the window, never speeding up or passing. None of these women had reported the incidents at the time. They'd dismissed their discomfort as paranoia, convinced themselves they were overreacting. Now they understood they'd been in danger. The laborious process of relating these reports to Kelmer's movements was initiated by Detective Ortega and Detective Lowe. They subpoenaed his employment records. Sparse as they were, Kelmer had worked odd jobs across 3 states over 2 decades, never staying anywhere long. Fixing fences on a ranch near Bend for a week, Packwood roofs for a month. Between jobs, he vanished into the forests, sometimes for months at a time. They examined his vehicle registrations and discovered that he had been driving the same white Ford F-150 since 1995 and had repeatedly let the registration lapse, accumulated dozens of parking tickets at trailheads and campgrounds. He was a ghost who watched over the wilderness and lived in plain sight. In August 2019, forensic teams executed a search warrant on Kelmer's truck, which had been impounded after his arrest. The vehicle was a disaster, cluttered with camping gear, empty food containers, and stacks of handwritten journals. The journals disturbed me. Page after page of observations about women he'd seen on trails, detailed descriptions of their clothing, their habits, where they camped, whether they were alone. Backs of heads, side profiles, and crude sketches were included in some entries. Others contained angry rants about women who'd ignored him or told him to leave them alone, calling them rude, ungrateful, asking for trouble. One entry from July 2013 read, "Saw a girl today at Canyon Creek. Dark hair, college age, hiking alone. Too confident. Doesn't understand how vulnerable she is. Someone should teach her." The entry was dated 3 weeks before Maury disappeared. The truck was examined by forensic analysts for tangible evidence. They found hair samples, fiber evidence, and soil consistent with the area where Maury's remains had been discovered. They also found something more damning. Hidden beneath the passenger seat, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a silver necklace with a small turquoise pendant. Linda identified it immediately from a photo. Maury worn that necklace every day since her 16th birthday. It had been a gift from her grandmother. The discovery was devastating and clarifying. It had been kept by Kelmer as a trophy. The prosecutor's office, led by Deputy District Attorney Rachel Ningwin, built the case methodically. They had Maury's notebook describing Kelmer by name and appearance. They had the necklace found in his possession. His journals showed that he was obsessed with women on trails. They had forensic evidence linking his truck to the burial site, and they had his own words from the interrogation. Ambiguous, but incriminating. She ought not to have run. Ningwin knew it wasn't a perfect case. The remains were too decomposed to show signs of trauma. There was no confession, there were no witnesses to the actual crime, and there was no obvious cause of death. A defense attorney could argue circumstantial evidence, could claim the necklace had been found in the forest and picked up innocently, could suggest Maury's notebook entries reflected paranoia rather than reality. But Ningwin believed a jury would see the pattern. Kelmer was a predator. Maury had been his victim. In September, Kelmer's public defender, a weary man named Thomas Callahan, who'd been assigned the case by the court, attempted to negotiate a plea deal. He was aware that the evidence was damning, knew his client's journals alone would horrify any jury. He proposed a plea to manslaughter, 15 years with possibility of parole. Ningwin rejected it immediately. This was murder, premeditated, calculated, cruel. She would accept nothing less than a full trial and a conviction for second-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison. Callahan attempted again in October, offering involuntary manslaughter, suggesting Kelmer had only meant to frighten Maury, that her death had been accidental, perhaps a fall while fleeing, and Ningwin refused again. She met with Linda and Robert Kelly, asked them what they wanted. Linda's answer was clear. She wanted the truth told in open court.
She wanted the world to know what had happened to her daughter. She wanted David Kelmer to spend the rest of his life behind bars, knowing he would never walk a forest trail again. The trial was scheduled for February 2020, but in late November 2019, Detective Lowe uncovered something that changed everything. He'd been reviewing cold cases across the Pacific Northwest, looking for patterns similar to Maury's disappearance. He found 3. In 2003, a 22-year-old woman named Ashley Drummond vanished while hiking alone near Mount St. Helens. Her car was found at the trailhead, her backpack discovered 2 miles into the forest, but her body was never recovered. In 2008, a 19-year-old named Caitlin Marsh disappeared from a campground near Packwood, less than 20 meters from Canyon Creek.
She told friends she was going for a walk before dinner. She never returned. Rebecca Torres, 31, went missing in 2011 while on a solo backpacking trip in the Goat Rocks wilderness. Search teams found her tent still set up, food untouched, but no sign of Rebecca herself. Lowe cross-referenced the dates and locations with Kelmer's known whereabouts. Employment records placed Kelmer near Mount St. Helens in the spring of 2003. Traffic citations showed he'd been pulled over for a broken taillight just outside Packwood in July 2008, 2 weeks before Caitlin Marsh disappeared. And a hunting license application listed an address in Randall, Washington in 2011, less than 10 miles from where Rebecca Torres was last seen. The coincidences were too strong to ignore. Lowe contacted the families of all 3 women, requested DNA samples, and began the process of searching areas near where each woman had disappeared. If Kelmer had killed Maury Kelly, there was a strong possibility he'd killed others. In December 2019, a search team returned to the area near Mount St. Helens where Ashley Drummond's backpack had been found 16 years earlier. They discovered a shallow burial site beneath a fallen tree that was overgrown with moss and ferns with the help of cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. The remains were fragmentary, but dental records confirmed the identity. Alicia Drummond's forensic examination revealed evidence of skull trauma by blunt force. She hadn't wandered off, she'd been murdered. A search near Packwood in January 2020 uncovered remains consistent with Caitlin Marsh, buried in a ravine less than a mile from the campground where she'd vanished. The third search for Rebecca Torres yielded no results. The Goat Rocks wilderness was vast, rugged, and the years had erased too many clues. But 2 out of 3 was enough. David Gene Kelmer was charged with 2 additional counts of first-degree murder. The evidence linking him to Ashley and Caitlin was circumstantial but compelling. His presence in the area, his history of targeting single women, and the resemblances in the disappearances of the victims. Prosecutor Nguyen knew the cases would be harder to prove than Maury's, but she was determined to try. The families deserved clarification. The victims deserved justice. The trial, now encompassing 3 murders, was postponed until June 2020 to allow both sides time to prepare. However, the world changed in March. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down courtrooms across the country, and Kelmer's trial was delayed indefinitely. For Linda Kelly, the delay was agonizing. She'd waited 6 years for answers, another year for an arrest, and now the legal system had ground to a halt. She spent the pandemic months isolated in her home, watching the case updates online, attending virtual hearings where Kelmer appeared via video link from jail, his face emotionless, his eyes still unsettlingly calm. Robert Kelly devoted himself to research, assisting Detective Lowe with timeline compilation and evidence for the additional charges. He corresponded with the families of Ashley Drummond and Caitlin Marsh, sharing resources, offering support. The man who had taken their daughters had united them into a community of mourners. The trial finally began in September 2021, more than 2 years after Kelmer's arrest. The courtroom in Stevenson, Washington was small, outdated, with wooden benches and fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly. COVID protocols meant limited seating. Linda and Robert Kelly sat in the front row, holding hands and wearing masks. Behind them sat the families of Ashley Drummond and Caitlin Marsh. Thousands of people viewed the proceedings, which were streamed online. Prosecutor Nguyen opened with a detailed timeline of Maury's final days, walking the jury through the notebook entries, the forensic evidence, the necklace found in Kelmer's truck. She read from the journals aloud as she introduced them, her voice steady but filled with controlled rage. She showed photos of Maury, smiling, vibrant, alive. Then she showed photos of the burial site, the fragments of bone, the tattered gray fabric. The defense argued reasonable doubt. Callahan claimed Kelmer was a loner, socially awkward, perhaps inappropriate in his interactions with women, but not a killer. He suggested that the entries in Maury's notebook did not reflect reality, but rather his anxiety. He argued the necklace could have been found by Kelmer weeks or months after Maury's death, scavenged from the forest innocently. He pointed out that there was no direct evidence Kelmer had ever harmed Maury, no witnesses, no murder weapon, no cause of death. But when Callahan tried to dismiss the journals as the writings of a lonely man, they were impossible to explain away. Nguyen presented handwriting analysis showing entries had been added after Maury's disappearance, including one from 2014 that read, "They'll never find her. The forest is better at keeping secrets than people." The jury deliberated for 3 days. On October 8, 2021, they returned with the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Maury Kelly, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Ashley Drummond, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Caitlin Marsh. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs. Shaking, Linda Kelly fell into her husband's arms. Robert sat motionless, staring at Kelmer, who showed no reaction. Sentencing was scheduled for November. Kelmer was given 3 life terms in a row without the possibility of parole. He would die in prison.
As he was led out of the courtroom in shackles, he turned and looked directly at Linda Kelly. She met his gaze without flinching, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not remorse, not regret, just recognition that he'd been caught. Linda Kelly found the weeks following David Kelmer's sentence to be surreal. For 8 years, her life had existed in a state of suspension, every thought tethered to a single question: what happened to my daughter? Now she had an answer. Terrible and conclusive, yet a response nonetheless. The uncertainty that had consumed her like a slow fire was gone, replaced by something heavier but more bearable. Grief without questions, loss without the torture of not knowing. She could finally begin the process of saying goodbye. On a cold morning in late November 2021, Linda and Robert drove to the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest one last time. They brought with them a small wooden box containing Marie's ashes. The remains had been released by the medical examiner months earlier, but Linda hadn't been ready to let them go. She'd kept the box on her nightstand, occasionally speaking to it in the dark, relating the trial, Kelmer's conviction, and their never-ending search to Marie. Now it was time. They parked at Canyon Creek Campground, the same place Marie checked in 8 years before. The season was almost over, and the campground was almost empty. A light rain fell, misting the Douglas firs and turning the forest floor soft underfoot. They hiked together to Bear Creek, to the spot where Marie's hoodie had been found in 2013, where the Chiron still stood with its faded photo. Over the years, the Chiron had grown. Hikers had added stones, each one a small acknowledgement of a life lost, a prayer in granite. Linda knelt beside it and carefully placed the wooden box at its base. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling, and let the wind carry the ashes into the trees, into the creek, into the forest that had hidden her daughter for so long. Robert stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his own tears falling silently. They stayed there for over an hour, listening to the creek, the rain, and the wind blowing through the limbs. And when they finally stood to leave, Linda felt something shift inside her. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. Detective Sarah Ortega attended Marie's memorial service in Spokane 2 weeks later. It was held at a small community center filled with friends from Whitman College, professors who taught Marie, classmates who remembered her kindness. Photos lined the walls, images of Marie hiking, laughing, painting, living. Ortega sat in the back, uncomfortable in civilian clothes, unused to being on this side of grief. Linda Kelly spotted her and pulled her into a long embrace. "Thank you," Linda whispered. "Thank you for never giving up." Ortega wanted to say something meaningful, something that would honor the years of work, the sleepless nights, the relentless pursuit of truth, but all she could manage was, she deserved to be found. Linda gave a nod, realizing that sometimes the simplest words carry the most weight. Detective Marcus Lowe continued investigating. Questions persisted despite Kelmer's imprisonment.
Rebecca Torres, the woman who disappeared from Goat Rock's wilderness in 2011, had never been found. Lowe believed Kelmer was responsible, but without remains, without evidence, there could be no charges. He returned to the wilderness multiple times over the next year, searching areas Kelmer had been known to frequent, following leads from hikers who'd reported seeing suspicious activity. In the summer of 2022, a climbing team discovered human remains in a remote gulch near Old Snowy Mountain, buried beneath rockfall. Dental records confirmed the identity: Rebecca Torres. She'd been there for 11 years, less than 3 miles from where her tent had been found in 2013. Her family held a quiet funeral that autumn. Standing in the back of the church, Lowe attended. Another case closed, but never truly resolved. The conviction brought changes to the way missing persons cases were handled in the state of Washington. Ortega testified before a legislative committee in early 2022, advocating for better coordination between agencies, mandatory DNA collection from families of missing persons, and increased funding for forensic technology. The committee passed a bill named in Marie's honor, the Marie Kelly Forest Safety Act, requiring all national forest campgrounds in Washington to maintain digital check-in systems with photo verification and emergency contact information. It wouldn't prevent every tragedy, but it might save someone. It might give investigators the tools they needed before years were lost. Linda Kelly became an advocate. She joined a national organization supporting families of missing persons, speaking at conferences, offering guidance to parents navigating the impossible limbo of not knowing. She shared Marie's story not to dwell in sorrow, but to remind people that behind every cold case was a human being who mattered, a family that refused to forget. She started a scholarship fund at Whitman College in Marie's name, supporting students studying environmental science and wilderness conservation. The first recipient was a young woman from Seattle who'd read about Marie's case and been inspired to dedicate her career to protecting the forests Marie loved. Robert Kelly returned to teaching in 2023, part-time, leading a course on Pacific Northwest history at a community college in Spokane. He no longer spent hours in his garage surrounded by maps and case files. He'd taken them all down, boxed them carefully, and donated them to Detective Lowe, who was building a database of unsolved disappearances in wilderness areas. Robert still hiked occasionally, never alone, never without telling someone exactly where he was going. The forest no longer felt like a place of mystery and danger. Once more, it was just the serene and beautiful forest. David Gene Kelmer disappeared into the Washington State Penitentiary system. He refused interviews, declined to speak with journalists or true crime podcasters who sought his story. In prison, he was quiet, kept to himself, spent most of his time in the library reading books about geology and wildlife. Other inmates avoided him. Guards reported he sometimes stood at his cell window for hours, staring at the mountains in the distance, expression unreadable. In 2024, a forensic psychologist who'd evaluated him during the trial published a paper analyzing his journals, identifying patterns consistent with predatory behavior and antisocial personality disorder. The paper concluded that Kelmer had likely been active for decades, that the 4 known victims were probably not his only victims. Families of other missing women began reaching out to authorities, asking if their cases could be reviewed. Some were reopened, some remained unsolved. The forest kept its secrets, even after Kelmer's arrest. On August 18, 2024, 11 years to the day after Maury Kelly disappeared, a group of hikers organized a memorial walk at Canyon Creek Campground. Over 100 people attended, many who'd never known Maury but had followed her case, had been moved by her story, had felt the injustice of her loss. They walked the trail together, silent and reverent, carrying candles even though it was midday. When they reached Bear Creek, they found the cairn larger than ever, stones piled high, and beside it, someone had planted a young cedar tree. A small plaque at its base read, "Maury Kelly, 1994-2013. The forest remembers." Standing together among strangers who'd become friends, Linda and Robert were present, a family through shared grief. Linda placed her hand on the tree, felt the rough bark beneath her palm, and allowed herself to believe that something good could grow from something so terrible. Detective Ortega retired in late 2024 after 30 years in law enforcement. Her final act was to digitize every piece of evidence from Maury's case, uploading it to a secure database accessible to researchers, journalists, and families of other missing persons. She wanted the case to be a resource, a teaching tool, a reminder that persistence was important, that science was important, and that even when things seemed impossible, perseverance could bring about justice. At her retirement party, Lou presented her with a framed photo of Maury smiling in front of a waterfall, the same image that had previously been laminated and displayed at the Chiron. On the back, Linda Kelly had written a note, "You gave us our daughter back. We will never forget the Gifford Pinchot." McCallum-Gifford National Forest remains one of the most beautiful places in the Pacific Northwest. Thousands of people hike its trails every year, camp beneath its trees, find solace in its silence. Most will never know about Maury Kelly, about the young woman who walked into the mist one August morning and never returned. But some will. Some will see the Chiron at Bear Creek, read the plaque beneath the cedar tree, and understand that the forest is not just a place of beauty, it's a place where lives were lived and lost, where families searched and grieved, where justice came slowly, but came nonetheless. And they'll leave a stone of their own, adding to the Chiron, honoring a stranger they'll never meet, but whose story reminds them that every person matters, that every disappearance leaves a wound, and that healing begins when the truth finally comes to light. Linda Kelly still visits the forest twice a year, once in August, once in May. Robert's health makes the hike too difficult, so she now walks alone. She sits beside the Chiron, speaks to her daughter, and whispers the names of those other lost women. She listens to the trees take in and watch, the creek move by incessantly, carrying everything downstream. She thinks about the girl Maury was, brilliant and kind, excited about the future, full of plans that would never be realized. She thinks about the woman Maury might have become, the work she might have done, the lives she might have touched. And she thinks about the years lost to silence, to searching, to the terrible not knowing that almost destroyed her. But mostly she thinks about the moment she finally learned the truth, terrible as it was, and how that truth had set something free inside her. The wondering was over, the searching was done, her daughter had been found, and the man who took her would never hurt anyone again. As the sun sets over Canyon Creek, casting long shadows through the Douglas firs, Linda stands and brushes the dirt from her knees. She touches the cedar tree one last time, feeling its strength, its resilience, the way it grows despite the storms and the cold. And she walks back toward the trailhead, toward her car, toward home, carrying with her the knowledge that love persists even after death, that memory is stronger than forgetting, and that some lights, once extinguished, can never truly be put out. They live on in the people who remember, in the stones left by strangers, in the trees planted in honor of those who are gone. Maury Kelly is not forgotten. She never will be. The forest remembers, and so do we. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates true crime stories. Your support helps bring attention to cases that might otherwise be forgotten. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? Comment below. Every unsolved case represents a family still waiting for answers, still hoping for the closure that finally came to the Martinez family after nearly half a century of searching.